You recall the story of the Rabbi who says, before I begin to speak, I'd like to say a few words. So let me just start by saying, first of all, I'm grateful to you and thank you for your response and your words. It's a privilege to teach. It's a double privilege to teach colleagues and rabbis. I also want to not apologize, sort of point out, we have on the tables, actually, I took the liberty, because it is a high holiday seminar, I took the liberty of sketching at least a few themes that might grow out of either this morning or this afternoon's talk in terms of potential structures of sermons. I should have called attention this morning, but they're still on the table, I think. And secondly, we did prepare this sheet. I was behind schedule, a little flustered probably, and did not take time to go with you, but it's worth looking at. It is a sheet that has the sources, the primary source for Tselem Elokim, for the image of God, as the Gemara calls it, the Klal Gadol, the fundamental principle of the Torah, from which all the other commandments flow. As I argued this morning, it's also the driving force behind redemption, our dream of Tikkun Olam, perfecting the world, namely creating a world which sustains these dignities. But I'd like to call your attention to the text. It's worth looking at, and I apologize for not getting to it. My theme this afternoon is really how we get there. I mean, it's very nice to give a vision of Tikkun Olam, and who could be against it? I mean, love and make a nice world and be kind to your fellow human being and treat them with infinite value. I mean, so who could be against it? The real challenge, the real difficulty, it took me many years till I got older to grasp that maybe no less an important contribution of the Jewish religion to the world is a method of getting there, because everybody wants to get there. But the problem is, frequently in the process of getting there, we're living in the last 200, 300 years, the most revolutionary period of history, in which major world movements have seriously said, we can now do it. We can make the world perfect. And we're about to do it, and we'll do it. And in the process, of course, have unleashed some of the most horrific, totalitarian, destructive powers that have crushed and murdered millions and so on and so forth. So we now understand that sometimes a vision is dangerous, because how you carry it out is no less important. And in many cases, in the process of carrying out, they're even more destructive. They, far from perfecting the world, they destroy it. So I think the major contribution I want to reflect on is Yahadut's teaching of how we're going to get there and what that spells out in terms of personal life, in terms of the Jewish religion, and maybe in terms of model for the world. So I'll start from the beginning. Is someone showing the slides? Good. Okay. There is a God. Obviously, someone is showing all these slides here. The point is that the concept of Judaism, that it is a brit, a partnership between God and humanity, that is the method, is one of a series of very seriously competing views as to how you get there. Widespread worldviews, religions, political movements that have the same goal, perfecting the world, but believe they have alternate methods. These methods are not only prevalent and powerful, attractive to millions, hundreds of millions, but they have a powerful appeal to Jews. Even within the tradition, to some extent, these methods have had dominant or are dominant forms. Nevertheless, my argument is that covenant is the most promising alternative for how the world gets there. So covenant means this partnership is an alternative to, well, first of all, by the idea the gap is so great between the world as it is. I mean, again, where I heard Reverend Murray point this out, 35,000 children die every day from preventable diseases, from diarrhea, dysentery, the end stage of these various diseases and hunger, who could be kept alive. He didn't say it, but I know the report of the UN. Kept alive by $1 worth of food, kept alive by millions die of this dehydration that could be kept alive by some clean, fresh water, and oral rehydration tablets cost 25 cents a day. So millions are dying for lack of 25 cents worth of oral rehydration tablets. So there's a vast gap. So there are world religions, including our own, and particularly in this medieval phase, that said, you know what, the idea of a perfect world is right, but it's never going to happen. The only way it's going to happen is a miracle. God is going to bestow a perfect world. God's going to send a Mashiach that is going to lead the world to final perfection. That's, of course, classic dominant view in medieval Judaism. Or, in the Christian version, God is in person going to come and lead this miracle and make it happen. Or God is going to bring an apocalypse, after which all of evil will be wiped out and human good and the perfect world will triumph. This is a very serious, widespread view, powerful in Islam. Shia particularly are thinking literally in those terms of a Redeemer coming and leading this by God's will. That's a very serious and appealing alternative to hundreds of millions around the world. Covenant says, no, that's not the way it's going to happen. Second major alternative, very widespread, is, frankly, this world is never going to be perfect. You can try, you can make it better, you can do everything. In the end, it's not going to work. You want a perfect world, God will give it to you in the world to come. So in this life, you know what you should do? Live this life modestly, restrainedly, do the right thing, do what God wants, and you will get eternal bliss. That's the perfect world. In that world, innocent will not suffer, and no one will die prematurely. And again, a tremendously powerful appeal, very widespread. And again, I'm not against it. Some of my best friends are rabbinic Jews, including me, who believe in it. That's not the point. The point is, Covenant says that is a blessing, that's a promise, but that is not a substitute for what you're supposed to do in this world, or what we think we can accomplish in this world. And of course, again, what made possible the suicide bombers? What made possible 9/11? Muhammad Atta, I'm sure you read, it was in the papers, his final musings a few hours before he crashed the plane. And he basically said, again, I'm giving up a few hours in this world, or days or years, for this eternal reward, eternal bliss. And he understands that, and it's worth it, and that's the point. And therefore, this gave him the strength, it gives the suicide bombers the strength to say, yeah, I'll kill myself, doesn't matter, because something much more eternal, much more valuable is the return. And this life doesn't mean very much, frankly, and so why not? And the third serious alternative to covenant or covenantal living is really, of course, most powerful in Eastern religion, particularly Hinduism, Buddhism. But of course, it's an appeal that has had very powerful appeal, has appeal to Jews as well. Some very important strands of Kabbalah take the same line. Basically, it is you want a perfect world, not in this flesh and blood, mortal, physical world, the body world. It's not going to happen. This world is an illusion. Body is an illusion. It's a surface way of living. It's being trapped in fantasies and dreams. You want to have happiness. You want to have physical. That's all fleeting illusion. It's ego-driven, and the ego itself is the greatest illusion, because the human being is not an ego, not a self. So the way you want a perfect world is you want to get enlightened. You want to give up this stuff. You want to meditate. You want to deepen yourself. You want to tune into the deepest levels of creation, become one with it. You will then become whole. You will, in fact, be released from this round of illusion and rebirth, and you will achieve permanent nirvana. Tremendously powerful appeal. Now again, if I was looking at it from a contemporary viewpoint, the Marxist critique, for example, is, bluntly, the promised world to come. That's why you didn't change this world. That's why you left it rotten. That's the danger, by the way, of this position. Covenant says it comes after, but it's not a substitute for it, and doesn't release you from your mission in this world. The Marx says to be pie in the sky and the great by and by. In the meantime, you accept the old regime, you accept inequality, you accept evil, you accept inferiority. And that, of course, is one of the dangers of Buddhism. Well, when Blue and I had this experience of meeting with the Dalai Lama, it was one of the more interesting exchanges in the dialogue. He basically came out, and it was very interesting because, again, he's a very loving and very impressive person. But he sort of basically came out and he has this feeling Judaism is an inferior religion. You know why? Because it's all about body. It's all about, right? He says body, that's the lowest level. You have to relieve it. So it kind of took him a little time to adjust to the notion, because he wasn't consciously looking down, but he was. A higher religion is one that would renounce this world and really enter this deeper level of enlightenment. And we started to talk about it, and of course I pointed out to him, and he admitted it. I said, you know, what are you doing? That was their great struggle. Their great problem was not just they were in exile, that's why he asked us to come and show them how to live. I said the other major problem, which we hadn't anticipated until I got there, was the problem of modernity. They came from Tibet. It was not only backward, they were in the 14th century culturally. It's like the Ethiopian Jews. By being pushed into India, in fact, some of the educators told us, my biggest problem is not exile, my biggest problem is Michael Jackson, who was very hot at that time. All the kids were, you know, getting these records and CDs and iPods, and were trying to listen to it. And of course, it was the whole exposure to the modern world. But the point was, he said, as a result, the people who came out, they had to go to work. And they went to work. And suddenly he had a tremendous problem on his hands, which is there was no Buddhist philosophy of work. Work is a waste of time. Work is an illusion. Work is something you do, keeps you in poverty. But he suddenly had to make sense of something that we're doing full time, 40, 50 hours a week. He said, that's my biggest challenge. I have to develop some philosophy of work. I said, well, in part, the way Judaism has made that is by saying this world is not an illusion. It's a major frontier. It's a major responsibility. And what goes with it, that family, it never occurred to him, who spoke about Shabbat and family as a resource. And exile is, of course, one of the great resources for dignity and value. It never occurred to him. He's a celibate Buddhist, you know, monk. Never occurred to him that family, he never had a family. They sent him away to raise him to be the Dalai Lama. Never occurred to him that home, family, can be such a powerful foundation for meaningful living and existence. I mean, they were very excited by the idea. He was going to come home spend Friday night, and he was going to develop a whole Friday night, you know, sort of Seder for the Buddhist community, you know. At the end, he didn't make it, sent Robert Thurman instead. But that's not the point. The point is, again, this is an alternative vision of the world. I'm not saying to put them down. As I said, they're very serious Jews, medieval Jews, Kabbalistic Jews, who take exactly the same position. That being hung up on the physical, the external is the superficial. You have to renounce that and become enlightened, and you will achieve oneness with God, oneness with being, and you will achieve perfect fulfillment. Covenant says, with all due respect, I'm in favor of this. I think it's a great exploration. But for the mainstream and for the majority, that's not what our mission is. That's not the way we're going to perfect the world. Or is the fourth, which of course is the most dynamic competitor to Judaism, the most powerful and quickly spreading view in the whole world. It is, of course, secular revolution. The secularization of the last 300 years. The great message of modernity was humans can take power, liberate themselves, improve life, extend life, all the Jewish promises. That's why modernity is so attractive to Jews, and still our main competitor still grabs them. All the things you dreamed about, all the things you lived for 3,000 years, you can have them now. And you can make it happen by, so in fact, part of that secular revolution was to get rid of God, because God held up the works, crippling us, according to Freud, crippling us psychologically, according to Marx, crippling us in terms of rebelling against the evil in this world. Get rid of God. Humans take full control. Medicine, science. You want to overcome poverty? Here's industry. Here's productivity. You name it. You want to overcome hunger? Here's agricultural technology beyond the wildest imagination. Tremendously appealing. It turns out, as I said, however, there's a catch. And again, I think that's what Covenant was trying to point out to. What goes wrong? Why did Nazism turn into mass murder? Why did Stalin turn into totalitarianism? Why did Maoism turn into mass murder? Because in the end, it's non-covenant. It doesn't think of partnership. What it thinks of, the goal is perfection. The people are in the way of perfection. We want to make a perfect world for them, but that's not the point. They're standing in the way. The rich peasants stand in the way. Kill all the rich peasants to make it a perfect world. The bourgeois, selfish people, family are in the way. Break up the family, get rid of the bourgeois. We'll make them equal. Why should women be bound on their feet and grow up like dolls that can't walk? So we're going to liberate them, and we're going to make a perfect world. In order to do that, We got to smash. I mean, why should we have two parties? I'm in favor women shouldn't be bound their feet. They shouldn't be turned into slaves. And you're against it, so we'll have two parties, one party. Nonsense. We're for women's perfection, equality. No right to have a second party that opposes us. So we won't have a second party. And if you don't say the right thing, we'll send you off to concentration camp. So in the name of that perfection, it ends up, one more example. It's got to happen in my lifetime, said Mao Zedong. We're not going to wait here. We're not going to negotiate. We're not going to go a step at a time. We're going to do this in one shot. Why? What are you really saying when you say it must happen in my lifetime? What you're really saying is, you're all a bunch of jerks. You're all a bunch of evil people. If I wasn't here with the right idea, and if I don't carry it under my supervision, hashgacha, exactly the right way, it's not going to happen. So the real message is not that all people are equal and dignified. The real message is that you're all nothings, and that I need to be here to beat you into doing the right thing. And I'll beat you and I'll crush you until you do the right thing. So of course, that message won. I'll beat you and I'll crush you. What Covenant says, therefore, is the only way out, is the only successful way in the long run, is partnership. That's based on mutual respect, on commitment, and on willingness to work together. The key to Covenant, next slide. The keys, which, and I love this about the Bible starts by saying, God had to learn this lesson too. God wanted a perfect world. So if you want a perfect world, and people, what happens to a perfect world? People come in and they start acting evil. They start being cruel to each other. They start oppressing each other. So what did God say? Because God wants a perfect world. God said, I can't stand this. You know what? I'm going to wipe out this whole thing and start over again. That's what perfectionists do. If you want perfection and you want to work with people, you got to kill all the people because they're not perfect. They're not going to be perfect. So if you want them to be perfect, you got to kill them all. So what happens after the flood is the critical point. God, and I believe again the obvious answer is out of love. Notice before the flood what God said. God saw how great was man's wickedness, therefore God regretted made man. God is so in love with perfection that the human beings are spoiling it. So he says, I want to get rid of human beings so I can have a perfect world. It's like the housewife who would like a perfect furnished and perfectly endowed living room, and the kids come in and keep messing it up. They spread. So we get rid of all the kids, that way we'll have a perfect, laid out, neat, perfect furniture. So God, out of love of perfection, is ready to wipe out the world, and then God realized that's not the way to go. Of course, I'd like to live at a deeper level. What does it mean? It means when if I love you, if God is really merachem al habriyot, if I love you, you know what? I got to love you as you are. It means I have, yes, I want to change you, I want to change the world, but a true perfectional world starts by accepting it as it is. That's the ultimate form of love. You're not going to be exactly my standard, you're not going to be what I want. I'm starting by accepting you as you are. I think it's the key to Rabbi too. I always tell my students in Rabbi is to say, you got to start by working on loving your congregation. You know why? Because if you don't love them, you're going to hate them. They're impossible. Did you ever deal with a congregation? No, they drive you crazy. They criticize whatever you do. You never do enough. Whatever, right? So the truth is, if you didn't love them, you'd hate them, because when you love them, you sort of say, okay, well, that's the way they are. It's their flaw. It's their weaknesses. And you kind of act a little forgiving, maybe. So that's the fundamental move that Hashem makes. To accept the world as it is the first step. And that's what went wrong with Hitler. That's what went wrong with Stalin. That's what went wrong with Mao. It started because in the end there was contempt and hatred for the very people they were supposed to help. So you start the other way. Yeah, they're not perfect, they're not Aryan, they're not this. You accept them as they are. Hashem makes that move and says, I will never again do this, for the very reason that God wiped them out. Why? Because the devices of mankind are evil from his youth. But now I understand. I'll accept that. So you know what? I want you not to be evil. I want you to be good, but I'll work with you. I'll make a partnership. Together, we'll try to make this a better world. Together, we'll try to improve you. I'll give you freedom. I'll respect your free will. I will never again coerce you to be good. I could. God could. Next slide. What the Torah says, God makes a self-limit. We live in an objective world of natural law. You know one of the problems of living in an objective world of natural law? The law of gravity operates for good and for evil alike. If an evil man takes a child to the top of a mountain and throws this innocent child off the top of the mountain, the gravity will pull that child to its death. God doesn't step in and lift up the child. Whereas if an evil man does it, no one steps in and sends a thunderbolt to stop them. So what the Bible says is, you know why? Because God has self-limited. To make existence possible, to make human dignity possible, to make a free will possible, God says, I'm setting up natural order. That's the way the world will operate. Which means, yes, innocent will suffer and won't be punished on the spot, the bad guys. You will not get a cookie from heaven every time you do the right thing, which God could do. But that self-limit out of respect, affirmation, and love is from the divine side. And the divine side, that's a limit. I'm not going to change it. Again, by the way, it was my reaction to the Holocaust. I kept saying, well, why couldn't God do some miracle saving me? It really aggravated me. It really, to this day, aggravates me. But the reality is that's what the Bible says is the structure of reality, and that structure was created out of love to sustain life, to sustain people, and to let them grow into Tselem Elokim, into full human beings. Okay, next slide. So what is the method then? You want to improve the world, you accept it is, but now I still want to improve it. I want to make it perfect. So the key to that method is very simple. You understand that the ideal, you have a clear picture where you want to go, but you understand the real world also. You affirm them both, and you try now to move the real, starting where it is, toward the ideal. That's the movement. This is the example the Torah gives. In a perfect world, in the Garden of Eden, God gives you seed-bearing plants to eat. Not just humans, animals. Everybody is supposed to be vegetarian. What does vegetarian have to do with perfection? It's very obvious. The definition of perfection is life. The fulfillment of life, the dignity of life. So vegetarianism says nobody should live by killing living animals to enable their own life. It's a form of disrespect and destruction of life. So if we were living in an ideal world, you would not live, even though you need to live. If you didn't need, you wouldn't live. But you live by not inflicting death on developed high-level organisms. That's the ideal world. But we're not living in an ideal world, we're living in a real world, right? In the real world, it's not just that people are used to eating meat. And that's not even Richard Rubinstein's argument that they need to kill and spill blood, so let them do it to animals, because if they don't do it to animals, they'll do it to humans. The truth is, in the real world, there's protein shortages. In the real world, humans are hungry, and if they didn't have this animal to hunt, maybe they would hunt and kill their neighbor and take their food. So in the real world, we're going to make a compromise. We're going to let you eat meat. That is the compromise, the ritual, which is really an ethical statement and a fundamental statement of the covenantal process. We're not going to demand the best possible standard. We're going to, the best standard, the ideal standard, we're going to demand the best possible standard. And that movement toward reality is we permit meat. We permit you to kill living things. But you say, that's not a compromise. That's a sellout. You're allowing meat. I come to the next slide. The answer is no, we're not selling out. We're compromising, meaning we're going to permit you to eat meat, but with restrictions. And what is the restriction with meat? You must not eat the flesh with its lifeblood. You can't eat blood. Why not? Next slide. Why not? Because as Leviticus points out, because the life of the flesh is the blood. If you're eating the meat, at least acknowledge that you should not be. At least admit that you're not God who owns this life. Admit that life is sacred and that this is not the ideal behavior. Therefore, in the act of eating, you acknowledge and affirm your reverence for life, and maybe by implication that someday we'll all be vegetarians again when we perfect the world. Now, by the way, this is not the Jewish people. This is the whole world according to the Torah. It always haunted me and fascinated me that of all the false libels stuck on the Jews that they eat blood of kids, this is the religion that said not only are Jews not allowed to eat blood, but humans are not allowed to eat blood. And this is from people who claim, of course, that they're eating the blood of Christ in the Mass. So that's another story. But to come back to the main point here, So the statement of restriction, by the way, Kashrut took this model, and I believe behind Kashrut is the fundamental notion of reverence for life. Jacob Milgram has written about this brilliantly, right? Literally, it starts by the ideal, Kashrut is the ideal of vegetarianism. Everything vegetable, everything mineral is kosher, automatically. What is not kosher? The answer is you want to eat animal organisms, then we restrict. And again, the lower the life, the less the restrictions. You want to eat fish, that's the lowest form of life we're allowed to eat as a Jew. We restrict only species, that's the only restriction with fish. You want to eat the next higher level of life, we restrict species, birds, and we restrict how you kill it. And how do you kill it? You're supposed to cut its throat so it loses consciousness, so you have minimum suffering. So again, you're showing reverence for life, that the blood will go out. You want to eat the highest level of life, animals, so we restrict species, we restrict how you kill it, and we restrict how you prepare it. And guess what? How you prepare it, what's prohibited? You can't mix or cook meat and milk. And the message is obvious. Of course, meat is the symbol of death, and milk is the symbol of life, mother's milk. And that is exactly the message we're trying to give you. So again, kashrut is only an exaggerated or extended, maybe is a more accurate term, of what the Torah claims all humans, that in the process of compromising with reality, they should nevertheless uphold and commit they're going to work toward redemption. That's the covenantal method. So no act, and this is the broader thing, people talk of halakha as a halakha, it's not a set of laws. What it is covenantal actions. The central claim of halakha is, of the covenant is, every act of life is potentially shapeable. You could eat, you need to eat to live. It's an act of life. But you can shape every act of eating to express reverence for life as you eat. But every other act of life is potentially shapeable. Speak, I can say any word I want to. It's a free country, right? So the next word I say can be a word of emptiness, degradation, death. Or the next word can be a word of life, dignity, value. I would say as a rabbi, it's a tremendous responsibility. A speaker, you know what? For the next hour, they're committed to listen to you, the next half hour. So you come in, you're totally unprepared, you haven't thought about it, you repeat some cliches you remember, you've probably said it the fourth time anyway. Well, what have you done? You've just inflicted a half hour of death on your congregation. They lost a half hour of their life, they'll never get it back. They grew nothing, they learned nothing, they heard nothing. So in the end, literally, you took a half hour of death and inflicted on it. You know what? You did it to yourself, too. You learned nothing, developed. So that's the point. The point is, there's no act of life. Speaking. What's Lashon Hara about? Lashon Hara Lashon Hara, frankly, again, I think Lashon Hara, by the way, is overrated in my judgment. It's kind of one of these pious things no one can live by. It's really not covenantal, it's ideal, not covenantal. But okay, it's a beautiful ideal, I love it. You try not to say gossip. But what's the truth behind Lashon Hara? After all, Lashon Hara is not about spreading false rumors. Lashon Hara is about telling the truth about somebody. So why can't I plead truth? Say, yeah, sure I did it, but I told the truth, right? Doesn't God want me to tell the truth? The answer is yes. What's Lashon Hara about? It's telling the truth when there was no need to know. So why did you tell the truth about this person when there was no need to know? If I'm about to marry this person, you have every obligation to tell me. The guy's a scoundrel, the guy's a crook, the guy's an abuser. That's not Lashon Hara, that's a mitzvah, tell me. But I'm not about to marry this person. I have a connection. Why did you tell me this person is a thief or a crook? Because you wanted to degrade their Tzelem Elokim. You want to say they're not equal, they're not valuable, they're indignified, they're inferior. That's a violation of Tzelem Elokim. So you used your words for death and for degradation of life, not for life and quality of life. So that's the fundamental covenantal notion, that there's no act that's neutral, and every act can be shaped and should be shaped. That's the Jewish claim. To do the best possible reconciliation of the real, because you're not going to get people to go from 0 to 100 overnight. If you will, you'll have a civil war on your hands, like I said about slavery. But starting where they are, what's the most best possible? That's one of the great challenges of being a rabbi or a teacher again. How far can they stretch? I always tell people 5%. You're a great rabbi, if you can get them to go, if you set a standard that's 5 or 10% ahead of them, that's fantastic. You know why? If you set it 10% higher, they'll stretch, they'll make 5%, you're a huge success. Right? If you set it at the same level as them, there's no incentive, they're not learning, they're not growing, you're a panderer. But if you set it 5, 10% ahead, you won't succeed, but you'll move them. Now push it 15%. And you know what happens when you get it 15%? They can't reach it. They say, who is this person? It's not my leader. They're talking about, it's not a question. Or they begin to think, you're against me, you're trying to embarrass me, you're trying to set. You get 20%, you're not their leader anymore, you're gone. One of the great challenges of being a rabbi is to be enough ahead of your people, to push them, help them grow, but not so far ahead that you turn them off and they reject you. Rabbi Salanta has a great line. He once said, to be a great rabbi, you have to get the congregation so upset and so uptight about all your challenges, they want to fire you. So any rabbi who never wanted to fire him is no rabbi. Then he says, but any rabbi who they fired is no mensch. Because you didn't figure out that challenge. How do you challenge them without not only turning them off, without disrupting them, without rejecting them, without demeaning them? So that's the challenge of the covenant. Can you stretch people? Can you move them one step at a time, most likely, and keep them moving? Next slide. Okay, now what's the problem when you compromise and you get one step at a time? What's the problem? Well, it's obvious. What's the problem? When you compromise and you only move them one step at a time? I'm sorry?
You don't move very far.
First of all, they don't move very far. What's the other problem?
Slow.
What's that?
Slow.
Slow. It's very slow. Okay, we'll come back to that. What's the ultimate problem?
Slippery slope.
Well, the problem is you're selling out, you're compromising, you're allowing evil to go on. And what's more, with thanks to your approval of the compromise, they're going to do worse things, So in a sense, whether you like it or not, you become implicated in evil. Or you are collaborating, or you are sustaining it. So what do? The answer is, that's exactly the point. You know what? If your hands are not dirty, it means you're innocent. It's like I say, a doctor who never buried a patient is no doctor, because obviously if you're a serious doctor, you're trying to save somebody in a desperate situation, you're going to lose somebody. So you never took a dangerous or difficult patient. That's not a doctor, that's irresponsible. So the real challenge again is, could I take responsibility, because this is the best possible right now. But then don't fool yourself. Try to deal with some of the negative side effects, try to deal with some of the compromises and their bad fallout. In the case of the Bible gives this case, when you allow killing animals, you know what happens next? Slippery slope. And some people figure, well, less reverence for life, so they can kill people. So deal with that. Next slide. Okay, and of course, last but not least, keep reminding yourself you're in a covenant. People forget. It's very easy to do when it comes naturally. It's easy to do what's easiest. It's easy to do what doesn't really involve an effort or a tension between what is and what could be. So you've got to keep reminding yourself, and by the way, reminding God. That's again one of the really revolutionary, profound statements of Judaism. The authority, the vision of perfection itself is constantly challenged. And you remind God, you have to live up to this covenant too. You don't give blank checks to Mao or to the leader or to Jesus, or whoever it is. They also have to be challenged. They also have to be asked to live up to the covenant. Because a blank check ends up corrupting that side too. So you live, covenant is to live in tension between the world as it should be, which you know and you're trying to get to, and the world as it is. And the trick is, every day, every step. And you know what? You go as far as you can go, and it is slow. Although I said the alternative, sometimes you go faster, it's much slower because you set back everything. Like I said, the abolishing of slavery led to a civil war and 100 years of Jim Crow, so which was faster? But if you keep going every day, and here's the power of covenant, you take it as far as you can go in your lifetime. And then what do? It was all wasting time. We were stopped in the middle. The answer is no. It will be unless you do what obviously we do. We raise children, we raise a generation, we raise congregations, and we convince them this is a mission, it's unfinished, but you can carry it on. I'll give you a better answer. Not only can you carry it on, but my failure, quote unquote, Moshe Rabbeinu's failure, you can complete and make him retroactively a success. You can go into the land of Israel. He didn't make it. You can grow up enough to be able to fight and be an independent people. And you know what? As a result, his failure is not a failure anymore. His life lives in you. That's the power of covenant. So the life of Rabbi Akiva, the Romans tortured him, but he taught me it's worth being a martyr. He taught me don't be intimidated by force. So 100 or 1,000 years later, people not only carry on the covenant, but redeem, in a sense, the victory the Romans over him is now, he outlasted them, we outlasted them, and we're carrying on this covenant the next step. That's what the covenantal method's about. If you do this, and you don't drop the ball and you keep going, I was going to say in 4,000 years you'll get there, but it's not true. It's 4,000, you still haven't gotten there. It's also a tremendous reminder of the power of ritual and of learning. They had the power to keep that dream alive after 4,000. It didn't work. I used to be fascinated. How could it be? People said next year in Jerusalem every year for 1,800 years. So I always figured in the 1769th year, why didn't somebody come and say, you know, I've said this 1,769 times. It hasn't happened yet. This is a waste of time. Let's drop it. We're kidding ourselves. I mean, we're whistling Dixie past the graveyard. Forget it. But they didn't. The power of ritual, it made the original redemption exodus so powerful on Pesach. They said, you know what happened? I'm not going to deny it happened. And if it happened, then it'll happen again. And that's, of course, gave them the power in part to go back to Israel in the 18th and 19th century and pull off the miracle now. That's the covenantal method, which brings me to my next slide. Okay. Now, this can be very quick, because I want to give some time to you. Make a very quick 12 steps of covenant. I've shown you the covenant. 12 steps because there are 12 tribes of Israel. No, it's because it's a shameless knockoff of Alcoholics Anonymous, but that's live. Okay. Anyway, what's the 12 steps? How does it actually work in living reality? So again, very quick, I'm going to allow myself, I'm sorry, I'd love to explore each one with you at its time. It starts with love. I say again, if God didn't love the world, God would neither create it nor enter into covenant with it. If humans didn't love God or love existence or love their fellow human beings and feel they deserve a perfect world, they wouldn't enter the covenant. Who wanted the covenant? It's a job, it's an obligation, responsibility, has limitations, has commitments. What I need all this for? The answer is, out of love, you do it. Because you love these people, you feel they deserve a better world or a perfect world, so I'm willing to commit. Now, it starts with love. That's why the fundamental commandment that governs all Be'er Machavero is Ahavta Kamocha. No secret. Love is not a Christian idea, despite what they tell you on TV every day. Of course, it's a Jew-Christian idea, but I'd like to know where they got it from. Anyway, second, and more power to them. We should learn from them to not be embarrassed. And what's the fundamental commandment? What's the fundamental commandment between humans and God? We shouldn't be afraid to say that. Afraid to teach that, experience that. And again, it's not just you love God because you all have obligation to love God, because this God is with you. This God stands with you, holds your hand. When you walk in the valley of the shadow of death, holds your hand. This God suffers with you, shares with you, helps you, goes with you all the way. So that's why it starts with love. Now, there's only one thing stronger than love, and that is committed love. That's what covenant's about. It's not just love, it's committed love. What's the difference between love and committed love? Well, frankly, it's between a relationship and marriage. The difference between love is, and commitment means, you know what? I'm going to be there as an obligation, even on those mornings when I don't feel very loving. It's very important to know that. When you know that, you can afford to be yourself. When I first met my wife, I was trying to impress her, so I had my best behavior. The greatness of marriage is, now you're married, you're committed, now you can be yourself. You can be your old nasty, whatever it is. Because you know they love you anyway, they're committed, so you can be yourself. Well, but all kidding aside, that's the point. There are some mornings I wake up, I don't feel very lovely. I can't even stand myself, let alone my family, right? But I'm committed, I remind myself of that. And I make that effort, and so that's the power of love. Furthermore, the other strength of love, commitment means I commit in some fixed, concrete way. I love you means not global, you'll never live a global, it means I'll remember your birthday. Or I love you means I'll put down the toilet seat after I use it. So, I mean, there's 100 ways in which, that's what halakha is trying to do. It's trying to concretize. Love means I'll eat the food we ate together on our first date. And I'll think of you. Or the food we ate on our first Exodus, and I'll think of you, and I'll be grateful, and I'll celebrate with you. So it turns it into a concrete commitment that is finite and doable and pleasurable and shareable, as against a kind of a global. That's the power of entering into covenant. So if you've made that commitment, what do you do next? Well, of course, the answer is you still want to change the world. You can't do it alone. You need a community. That's too long to go into, but you can get the point. So where do I start? Well, if you follow the 12 steps, the answer is start where you are. I'd like to transform the world, but right now I'm building my career. I don't have time. So I'll concentrate on my particular work, and when I get to be a famous, well-established, that's when I'll change the world. I just arrived at this law firm. If I throw my weight around now, demand higher ethical standards, they'll kick me out, or they'll say, who's this guy? When I get to be senior partner, that's when I'll stand for ethics or justice or whatever it is we're supposed to be doing. So the answer is you're kidding yourself. Start right now where you are. You can say, what? I'd be a great rabbi. If I was in Berdichev, boy, I could sing and dance and eat schnapps, drink schnapps, and eat herring and make all the Hasidim follow me. But it's L.A. in the valley. I mean, go get a valley girl to appreciate whatever. Go get a modern suburban Jew to take seriously social justice. Tough, right? So if only I was born in, you name it, that's where I would be a great rabbi or a great leader. Well, the answer is just the opposite. Rabbi Zalman says, maybe ask yourself, if I was born here, I'm living here, maybe that's my mission is here. It's not over there. That's one of those, probably the Orthodox community. We all want to be in Berdichev, where women knew their place and where there was no opposition that claimed to be equally valid. I mean, that was a great moment. But you're not living in Berdichev anymore. Right? We're not living in Kansas anymore either. We're in California. Okay, so start where you are, and that's the point. If you start where you are. Now, if you start where you are, what covenant says, that's the greatness of being in a covenant. You're afraid to start. You're afraid to be the only one. But you know what happens if you start? You'll discover you're not alone. That's the greatness of covenant. First of all, you're not alone because God is with you. So if the whole world says you're crazy, they're wrong. Because the Infinite One understands exactly. In fact, you try to do the Infinite One's dream and will, and that gives you the strength to stand up and say, you're all crazy, I'm not crazy. You're wrong, I'm not wrong. And you're not alone because all the other people of the covenant are with you. Again, it's a tremendous reassurance to know that. It's very important, rabbis, know too, you're not alone. You have colleagues in the covenant. You have, the truth is the people are with you. In fact, I'll push it one step further, because I always give this example. When I got involved in Jewish-Christian dialogue, I started because I was very angry at Christianity for spreading evil about Judaism. I didn't start covenantally loving. Look, okay? In the process of that dialogue, I discovered the incredible power, spiritual, evocative strength of Christianity, the valid spiritual life. I discovered, you know what? They try to perfect the world in many ways. As I say, they're exactly on the exact, literally, this religion, exact same wavelength. Good, we disagree about important issues, including how you achieve it, and what does God do, and what do I do? But having said that, it was a tremendous thing. I came one day and said, Blue, I've always been thinking for years now, the Jewish people, 14 million, to lift the whole earth, right? You ever tried doing that? I'm going to get a hernia. 14 million people are trying to lift this globe. Then I said, you know what I just discovered? There's 1,900,000,000 other people who would like to lift the globe. Well, now I got a fighting chance, maybe. And you know what? The truth is we need a few billion more, and it still wouldn't be hard to do, but that's the point. If you join the covenant, you discover you're not only not alone because you got all these other covenant members, even more exciting, you know what? Everybody who ever lived in the covenant is behind you. And their lessons and their models are available today. That's what you do as a rabbi. This is what Sarah was like. You're looking for a model? This is what David was like. By the way, they're Jewish models. They're not perfect. But that's part of the incredible. And you know what? More than not only behind me because their example and their model is there, they're behind me because literally they staked their lives. They lived to get here. They made me possible. They staked their lives that will get to the final goal, and they couldn't make it. So it's me, in the sense I have a chance to redeem or complete Moses' life or Dvorah's life. In my work, I can make a contribution retroactively that's part of their covenantal accomplishment. Now, the central behavior pattern I can't repeat often enough, of course, is to choose life. Again, I have no time to defend this, but I'm happy to explore with you. Literally, I think there isn't a ritual or an ethical principle in Judaism that doesn't turn on this question. You have a choice of life and death. I quote Maimonides here, who quotes Moshe Rabbeinu. Maimonides points out, it's a brilliant insight in the guide, he says. Moshe says, I put before you today, es hachayim v'satov ha'moves v'hara. I put before you life and good, moves and ra, death and evil. Says Maimonides, notice the apposition in those words, how Moshe put up there. Life and good, death and evil. Says Maimonides, that's the definition of good. Every good, every mitzvah, every positive is nothing less than the choice of life in that situation. Now again, it's usually not a choice between poison and, and good food. It's usually a very mixed picture. So choosing life means maximizing life. We're talking about an imperfect world where we're acting covenantally, the best possible under the circumstances. But Maimonides says if you choose good, it means you're choosing life. If you look what is good, look for what's the choice of life, either quantitatively or qualitatively. That's good. What's the other side? You may not see it, but look more closely, you will see it seems to be a choice of X or Y, it's really a choice of death, and that's what makes it evil. Whether it's the wrong food, again, I say, well, kosher doesn't stop at how you slaughter the animal. And Zalman's absolutely right. How do you treat the animal? What's the quality of the food you eat? Are you eating food that's giving you life or giving you disease and death? That's the essence of kosher. It's choosing life. And someone who is not keeping kosher by ritual standards has the same set of choices and the same set of challenges. And that's what we should be teaching them. In your choice of food, do you eat anything that comes along, or do you choose life? And that applies to literally every ritual, and I would argue in every ethical act, and that's what the religion, that's the model of how you move the world closer to the ideal. Now, final point, how fast are we going to go? The answer is, you're not going to change the whole world and make it perfect. What's a human scale? You want to perfect humanity? Start with one people. You want to perfect the whole world? Start with one country. Start with one neighborhood. Start with one house and widen. Well, where are you going to start? So the covenant says respect human emotions. You know where you start? Start with your own family. It's one of the most widespread, vicious, unfair criticism of Judaism. The Jews are clowns, look out for themselves. It's totally missing the point. The point is, you're responsible for all of humanity, but if you're a human being, you will start with your own mother or with your own child. If you don't start there, you'll end up not being good to anybody, let alone. But then you widen out. You don't stop with your own wife and family. Then you widen out to non-Jews. You widen out to Africa. You widen out to the whole world. That's the way in which human emotions are respected, and you move the world toward perfection. You start with Jews being treated as Tzemel Kim, you'll raise any amount of money to make their life valuable, and then you extend it to African children who need that money, to you name it. And how fast do you go? I said before, it's human pace, as fast as they can go, the best possible right now. And again, if you overreach, you're going to fail. And if you underreach, you're going to fail in a different way. So you push them as fast as they can go, as the Supreme Court said, with all deliberate speed. And you know what? You'll go too slow sometimes. It's good to have somebody who'll criticize you and try to go faster. And you know what? Sometimes you'll go too fast. It's good to have somebody to criticize and say, don't go so fast. That's one of the greats of pluralism, is that no one can strike a balance, but when you have different viewpoints, they correct each other if you do it right. That's the human pace. And the human models, of course, again, starting with the Jewish people, we're a human model. The Bible does not present us as perfect. I always say that's something, Jewish heroes and Christian heroes. Jewish heroes are imperfect by definition. Abraham, Sarah, David, you name them. Sarah, I mean, loving, devoted, total good person, wife, do anything to have a child, anything for her husband's sake. And then when he marries Hagar, her suggestion, she gets jealous. A human being. She's not perfect. It's reality. So that's the point. The Christian, forgive me, pick on Christians today. Some of my best friends are Christians, but the Christian model, of course, is Jesus. Jesus is perfect. He is so perfect. He is born of immaculate conception, a virgin birth. His mother never was soiled by sex, by sweat, by semen. He is perfect, absolutely perfect. That's the Christian hero. I appreciate the logic. I understand because they're afraid. Human beings, it'll be all mixed up with all this grit and sweat and dirt. But of course, the opposite is true. In this real world, if you're not ready to get your hands dirty, if you're not willing to be soiled and sweaty, you're not going to have life, you're not going to have anything. So our heroes are not perfect. We are not perfect. But you know what? If we can do it, anybody can do it. Obviously, from generation to generation means you're not going to finish it in one lifetime. And that's why continuity is not mere survival. Continuity is about the vision, about realizing covenant, about the unfinished work, about an incomplete mission. Continuity is about education, getting people to freely step up and say, I get it. I get what went before me. I want to take up my share. I want to move. You moved your cheese as far as you can move it. I want to move it the next slot and the next slot. And you know what? It won't happen in my lifetime either, but you know what? It trains you to not only love people, but to love and respect and trust people you're not even unborn. Don't think you're so wonderful, and if you wouldn't do it, no one else would do it. Have the trust that people will come along and carry on where you stopped. And you know what? Sometimes it gives you the courage to say, okay, I'm going to fail. By pushing this hard right now, I'm going to fail. But that's okay, because I'm not the end. A generation later will come back and complete it. But if I don't fail now, they won't know what they have to do. I'll sell out. So that's part of the generation to generation makes me. The last point is my next slide. And I use a little time left. Sorry, it's a little hard to read. Okay. I want to complete this. It's on the website?
Put it on the website.
Okay, sorry, I apologize.
No, we'll put it on.
Let me say what I'm trying to say, because this, I think, is the most interesting and the most challenging for rabbinate in my lifetime. I'm working on this book about covenant, and looking at it in the methodology, I've tried to spell that, and I've tried to spell out how it works in actual fact. It occurred to me, looking back, one could say, there's one other dimension of covenant I didn't appreciate before. It's a partnership between God and humanity. But as I look back now, in the history of that partnership, there have been what I would call two grand renewals. Not just we renew the covenant every day by saying the Shema. Not just we renew the covenant every year by reenacting Shavuot. Not just we reenact the covenant on Simchat Torah by celebrating Torah. It's once in 1,000 or 2,000 years. The covenant itself was renewed between God and Israel at a new level of responsibility for both. So, look at the biblical Sinai. It's almost 2,000 years from 1800, roughly, Abraham, down to the destruction of the Second Temple, the biblical period. You can't even make it, I'm sorry, a little dark here. The point I'm making is the location was the Middle East. God's role, dominant, visible miracle interventions, right? You're coming out of Egypt. You weren't ready to go out of Egypt, but God took you out. The Egyptians are chasing you. God makes a miracle, splits the Red Sea, drowns the Egyptians, etc. A world where God is dominant and visible as the partner. You're a partner, but you're very much a junior partner in this situation. When God is dominant and visible, the religion reflects that. For example, who picks the leaders? The answer is, of course, God. God picks the Kohen by genetic election, picks the prophet by telling the prophet, you go and speak in my name. People listen, they don't participate much. This God is so electric, so dominant, so powerful, that you can't approach this God. You come too close to, you will die. You touch the ark, you will drop dead, literally. The Torah describes that. So what do? You go to the Beis HaMikdash where God is surrounded by all these protections. You have the Kohen standing between you and God, so you don't have to hit the electricity. Will not electrocute you. It'll electrocute the Kohen if he misbehaves. And you bring a sacrifice. You don't do much more than bring the sacrifice. Very passive. Jews are not educated in the biblical period because you don't know. You don't have to know. Like, what do you have to know? You go to the Beis HaMikdash, you see the lightning, you see a stand at Sinai, you see the thunder. You don't have to know a lot. You just know. Yeah, sure, I agree. Whatever you say, Lord. It's an offer I can't refuse. Okay, good. What made rabbis possible, and this is, of course, our glory, is the destruction of the Second Temple, which totally transformed the Jewish life. I mean, for the biblical, the whole struggle was, could you build a country on justice, on covenantal rules of justice and equality and dignity, in the face of a world of power politics where Assyria, Babylonia, they're all 10 times bigger than you, they're all ready to destroy you? Can you live by these standards in such a world? And of course the answer was, even without Assyria, they had trouble living by these standards. That's what Nevi'im are about. That's what the whole challenge is about. But the rabbis had to answer the critical question, how come the God didn't drown the Romans? After all, the first temple was destroyed because we committed idolatry, avodah zarah, killing. But the second temple was a revolt to get rid of the Romans so we could worship God with purity and sincerity. It was a revolt for Jewish dignity. It was a revolt for God's purity. So by every right, we should have won, and if we were losing, God should have smacked the Romans and won. So how do you account for this? So of course, the Romans' answer was very obvious, because our God is stronger than your God. But the Jews said, no, you don't measure God that way. God is all-powerful, unique. That's why their God lost. If we lost because God let us lose, why did God let us lose? So the Christians answered, don't forget, up to the destruction of the temple, the Christians were mainly Jews. The answer was, you know what? Because God has closed Judaism. He's replaced it with Christianity, and of course the best proof is the temple is closed. And so, forget about us being part of Judaism. We're a new religion, continuing you, replacing you, join us. What the rabbi's answer was, no, neither. The covenant remains, the vision remains. You know what happened here? A second tzimtzum, a second divine self-limitation. In the biblical period, God was more visible, more individual. God has now renewed the covenant, actually become more hidden, less visible, less interventionist, not because God abandoned us, God wants to come closer to us. The first uses of Shekhinah, God the close, loving mother role, come in rabbinic tradition. The rabbi said God has self-limited, become more hidden, so that humans can step up and take a greater responsibility for the covenant. So what's the example? No more heavenly revelation. No more voices from heaven. You recall the story of Rabbi Eliezer. If the voice comes from heaven, you ignore it. Why? Because God hasn't worked that way anymore. No more visible miracles. The rabbis say, it's not going to have a split sea ever again. So what's going to be the exodus of our lifetime? What do the rabbis answer? Which holiday is the exodus of Pesach in the rabbinic period? It's Purim. What's the difference between Purim and Pesach? It's obvious. Purim, there's no visible miracles. God does not send a prophet to tell Achashverosh, and he agrees and he changes. It's human politics. It's Mordechai taking responsibility. It's Esther playing bedroom politics, getting him jealous of Haman. And God, behind the scenes, helps a little bit, gives him a case of insomnia or whatever. But the point is, it's a different reality. In this reality, in the old days, God broadcast AM. Now, God is going to broadcast on FM.
Internet.
If you tune in to AM and you're going to say there's no God, there's no voice, but that's wrong because you're tuning in the wrong place. You want to know what God says? The answer is tune in. Who's the experts on tuning in? It's the rabbis. The rabbis say, here, we'll study the past record when God spoke from heaven. We'll use our intelligence and brain. What is God giving instructions right now? It's applying the past models, using my best judgment, adding what has to be added. And that's how God speaks to us. I keep thinking, people say to me, but I want to hear the good old, give me that good old religion, give me that old time. I miss hearing God's voice. Rabbi Soloveitchik's comment. He said, you're living in a world God doesn't speak anymore. What do you do if you're a rabbi? What's the rabbi's answer? If God doesn't speak to us, we speak to God. That's what prayer is about. We speak to God. It's an admission that you're living in a transformation role, but you have a more active role instead of sitting there quietly. It's the rabbis who made us the people of the book and turned us into Talmud Torah. So I'm sorry, I'm coming very late, and the toughest one is about to throw at you. So in essence, the expansion of Judaism from temple to home, the expansion of holiness into every area of life, the expansion of Shekhinah when you visit the sick, when you make love, when you study Torah, all this takes place as an affirmation of a new human responsibility for covenant. Now, what's my hook or twist or sink I want to finish with? I'm arguing in retrospect, looking back since modernity, we lived through another cosmic tzimtzum, another divine self-limitation. That's why we're living in a world that is totally secular. It's a world in which God becomes totally hidden. That means a world after the Shoah, but it happened before the Shoah already. God is totally hidden, not because God has abandoned us, this is the Jewish message, but because God has come even closer, but wants us to take full responsibility for the covenant. Not arrogant, not because we think we're God, but as a partner, meaning God is still our partner, we're still accountable, we are not God, we're still going to be judged. Now, how do I apply this concretely? Well, three quick examples. Holocaust. If humans had taken responsibility, if the Jews in 1800 had accepted the Zionist vision, don't wait for Mashiach, go to Israel and rebuild Israel, there wouldn't have been a Holocaust. If the German voters in 1930 had not voted for a reckless demagogue because they were worried about losing everything and willing to take him with his evil, openly proclaimed anti-Semitism? What if in 1943 or 41 the Allies had warned Hitler? What if in 43 they had bombed the camps? What if the average country had done what Denmark did, hide and protect its Jews? What if the neighbors had done everywhere what the Bulgarians did? They said, Hitler, you're not going to take the Bulgarian Jews. By the way, they let him take the Greek Jews because that was not belonged to them. They controlled the country now, but they wouldn't let him take their neighbors. What if the Poles had treated the Jews like those neighbors? What if American Jews had campaigned and closed down America until America did what it should have done? That's the Shoah. Now Israel. My answer is yes, that's the message of Israel. That's what it's all about. It's the Jewish people waking up and saying we have to take power for life. If you don't believe in taking power, death will win. So we have to take power and all the responsibilities and all the risks of power. By the way, it wasn't just the Jews. Again, Jews were the model unto the nations. The whole third world revolted against imperialist control. What's about women's liberation? What about the civil rights movement of blacks? What about gay liberation? What's going on here? The answer is the whole world got the message. That if you are a potential victim, you have to take power and take responsibility. Now, what's the Jewish counter message? The counter message is, when you take power, it's a covenant. You have to take limits. You have to have ethics. You have to have authority. You have to have responsibility. You have to understand limits. This is not just about Jews and Israel. And by the way, again, this is a whole separate conversation. I think a lot of the criticism of Israel is unfair because it's judging by an ideal standard rather than the real world. In the real world, I think it's shown remarkable restraint and a very high degree of ethical responsibility. But I'm really happy to have that conversation. Not that it's perfect, that's the point. If it's in the real world, it couldn't be perfect. So you need criticism, you need loving criticism, but it should be judged in the real world, not by these wild and totally untrue allegations of ethnic cleansing and things of that sort. So again, it's not just the Jewish people and it's not just the world. Now, what does it mean to be a rabbi living in a world where God is totally hidden? So here again, that's why this is the challenge and the opportunity of being a rabbi. If God is totally hidden, that means God is everywhere. That means you don't have to go to shul to have a religious experience. And one of our jobs is to do what the rabbis did. They said, he's now broadcasting on internet. He's now broadcasting on microwave, right? So we can be the leaders in showing them where to see God in caring, in loving kindness, in medicine, in business which creates and upgrades the world instead of polluting it. I mean, in every potential area, secular, God is there if you know how, we can show him. Number two, the rabbi said you've got to educate them so they will detect God, because you don't, in the old days you didn't have to have a detector, you could just tune in. Well, frankly, I want to come back, it's very harsh. The synagogue assumed you just came to synagogue, you had the experience of God's presence. In a world where God is hidden, it doesn't work. So even in the synagogue, it's not going to have an impact unless you help them drill deeper. Whether it's through learning, whether it's through music, whether it's through experience. My point is, if you keep them at the same level as before, it's not going to work because you're missing the broadcast. So one of the tasks of a rabbi is to, now I'll make it even sharper. In a world where God is totally hidden, I think the lay people become the religious models of how you find God and live God's covenant in the world. So does that put the rabbis out of business? No, my answer is, if the lay people are the rabbi, the great opportunity of being a rabbi in my lifetime and yours is to be a rabbi's rabbi, to educate, to role model. Tremendously important thing we often forget. Just role model, including how to be a parent. All the rabbis I grew up with, and we had a problem with our family because we were so busy being a rabbi, you got no time for your family. Well, one of the most important things you can do for them is to show them how to be a good parent, a responsible spouse, and not to totally abnegate your life. It's a very bad model for them, because then they'll abnegate their wife or their spouse for their work. It's very destructive. So the rabbi's task in our lifetime is to, A, to drill down deeper, to be the resource for all the past. This is my point. You can be a creative, and I speak as an Orthodox rabbi when I say this, I believe the whole tradition is available and should be brought with us. But that does not excuse the second half, which is to find the God in all these new places, to express it in all these new ways, to give them experiences that touch them where they are. So we, I believe, are at the beginning of the third stage of the covenant. And we know this profound paradox, and I think the Jews are going to be the world model for this. In this, we have total power and total freedom. We now understand after the Shoah, after the thermonuclear bomb, that human beings can wipe out God's world like they can complete it. We understand that. That's the Jewish model. What we're telling the world is, take power, produce more, but remember you're in a covenant, you don't own it, therefore you have no right to pollute it, to wipe out its species, to destroy it. We're saying take power, express yourself, be free, but if you don't understand you're part of a covenant, that freedom will turn into selfishness, narcissism, empty materialism. So live it covenantally. We'll give you a personal example of how you do that. Hard, we'll make mistakes. Anyway, to me, that's the amazing privilege of being alive in this lifetime. It's the Jewish people's issues, or the whole world's issues. How do you bring the past in the process of becoming modern without losing those values in the past? The whole world's struggling with this question. How do you take power without becoming oppressive and cruel and destructive? How do you produce without becoming the world's polluter and climate warmer? The whole world is struggling with these questions. How do you seek your dignity and security in Israel and do justice to Arabs and Palestinians? That's the whole world is wrestling with these questions. So I'd like to argue this is a chance for our renewal of the covenants, a chance for us to show living models. How in America, in total freedom, you can get people to voluntarily join a community and create a common, higher, more fulfilling living. Blue has pointed many times how to show richer family life through Shabbat, through a Jewish home. How to, I don't know where to start or where to end. But that, I think, is what rabbis could truly say. If we take up this responsibility, instead of complaining that we're being bypassed by lay people, instead of complaining the synagogue is losing its ground, we have to drill down deeper in the synagogue, and we have to be willing to move out of the synagogue and move the synagogue into wherever they are, wherever God is. We bring the synagogue, we bring our community, we bring our vision with us. And if we do, I think someday people look back and say this was no less a moment of renewal and rebirth than when the Talmud was born. And God is operating through you. God is operating through me. God is operating through lay people. Really, not just words. In other words, God's not going to make those kind of appearances anymore. God's not going to make miracles. But if you're a doctor, using God's natural will, you can make miracles of healing. God's not going to make miracles, but if you're a responsible politician, Israel will get through this danger security-wise. God is not going to make the kind of miracles the good old days, but nevertheless, we have the courage to live this covenant, then the answer is you can make the miracles of healing, of wholeness, of community, of responsibility. So that is, I think, the third age is one I'm privileged to be at the beginning of. I'm envious that we'll have longer periods to work in it. The sky is the limit. Both failure, we could totally assimilate. We could have one of the great renaissance of Jewish history. We end up with both, in fact, but I'm more hopeful of that renaissance, and I think it's a privilege to be allowed to work in this field at this time.